also, since we're in 11 states, the different ways that state choice about the program really comes into play and what it looks like on the ground. To orient you a little bit to me and Hillary, I'm the Federal Policy Director for CEO. So practically what that means for E&T is I spend some time interpreting national policy changes about the program for our offices. And when we are starting an office, I also spend some time with our new program staff on building a relationship with our local SNAP E&T agency and really thinking about how our program maps on to that existing E&T partnership landscape in the state. And then Hillary, you have a completely different and great perspective from E&T inside CEO, in that she trains all of our CEO program staff on how to run this program in sites as part of our training team. So that's a little bit about who you're talking to. So this is a little bit of a recap on what we covered the first time, just to catch up anyone and remind you about the broad strokes of the program. All states are required to operate SNAP E&T programs. E&T programs are described in each state's annual plan, which is submitted to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food and Nutrition Service. USDA has to approve those state plans, which describe how the funds will be spent on state and county E&T programs, how funds will be allocated, key E&T partnerships, and the service components that will be offered in that state. So this is a growing program, an exciting program. USDA provides about $350 million annually to states to operate SNAP E&T programs. And in fiscal year 2018, almost 500,000 individuals were served with this program. So one thing that you'll notice in this presentation that we went over last time, and you'll start to see it, is states do have considerable flexibility in designing their E&T programs. And the reason for that is this program is really meant to meet the needs of individuals who are receiving SNAP and need that vocational training and support. So in today's presentation, we're really just going to focus on getting familiar with E&T services, which are referred to as components. Just like any other funding you would pursue as an employment social enterprise, you have to think about how well aligned the funding is or the opportunity is with your program and mission. We're hoping that you'll walk away from today and see that employment social enterprises and SNAP E&T are quite well aligned. In fact, depending on your program model, you might not need to add anything to your services to become an E&T partner. Now, that's not to say that E&T partnerships mean business as usual. Through becoming an E&T partner, you will definitely focus on specific training needs of SNAP recipients. You'll have to administratively track how SNAP E&T participants move through your program and move through these components. And there'll be financial aspects to consider as well. But we're going to cover those in future webinars. And before we do that, we just really want you all to consider overall how E&T fits into your program and operations, and how much employment social enterprises in particular have to offer in E&T partnerships to make them successful. One last programming note, and then I'm going to kick it over to Hillary to start talking about that alignment specifically. This presentation is pretty policy heavy, talking about the definitions of components, and all of that information comes from USDA and FNS. So if you all have specific policy questions, we're going to kind of continue to defer to FNS's materials on those policy questions and really focus on what is CEO's experience in interpreting this program and working with SNAP E&T agencies. And then we also have Seattle Jobs Initiative on the line again to help us with those policy questions or any other questions that come up as well. So I'm going to kick it over to Hillary to talk about that alignment between E&T and social enterprises.
Thanks, Casey. So SNAP E&T was created by Congress to help SNAP recipients obtain employment and become self-sufficient, with the goal of reducing their reliance on SNAP. SNAP E&T is not actually a brick and mortar place, but it's a series of services or a set of services that states can work with partners to offer E&T participants. These services are called components, and that's a term that you'll hear quite a bit today. Because of this, SNAP E&T programs are flexible. States can reach out to SNAP participants to engage them in the program and make decisions about which SNAP recipients have the greatest need for services. States can also decide which partnerships to pursue to offer services. They will offer reimbursement to their partners, and while there are a few different funding types, today we are going to focus on the 50-50 reimbursement model. Lastly, states decide which service components they will support or offer to SNAP recipients in their jurisdiction. Each E&T partner must offer at least one E&T service component. The bulk of this presentation will cover how these components are defined. So you might be wondering, how exactly does SNAP E&T 50-50 work? So how it works is that SNAP E&T reimburses their 50-50 partners for providing services to SNAP participants. It starts with the federal government through the USDA, who approves the state plans for their E&T programs for that federal program year. When the states have those budgets and their plans approved, they partner with third-party agencies. That would be your employment social enterprises, to provide these services to SNAP participants or SNAP recipients. The SNAP recipients gain employment and access to additional benefits that you will hear more about later in this webinar. The next thing I'm going to discuss is the service and reimbursement cycle. So you've probably heard the term 50-50 thrown around a lot so far, and that term alludes to the reimbursement structure of the program. As a 50-50 E&T provider, you will be able to tap into funding that will support your financial sustainability through reimbursement for existing services that you provide. Here's how it works. First, employment social enterprises, which would be your organization, provide services to our SNAP receiving participants, fronting all of the eligible expenses with non-federal dollars. Next, we submit those expenses for offering the services and report on how participants are participating in the program. Our local SNAP agencies will review those reports to confirm the total amount eligible for reimbursement. After that, the SNAP agency reimburses 50% of those dollars that were spent on allowable expenses. And the best part about that is these reimbursed funds are unrestricted. Now that these dollars have lost their federal status, they can be reinvested back into the core program model, allowing us to serve more participants and start the cycle over again. So when you're thinking about becoming a 50-50 partner for services, and as you start this process of becoming a SNAP E&T provider, you will need to get familiar with the terminology associated with the program. A lot of the language associated with the SNAP E&T program implementation have specific definitions or meanings that are defined by FNS, the Food and Nutrition Service. Once you master the terminology, you are well on your way to SNAP E&T success. One key term to know is component. A service component is an activity that is provided by your social enterprise to eligible SNAP recipients and consists of services that are eligible for reimbursement. On this slide, you can see a list of eligible components. To become a 50-50 partner, you will need to offer at least one component to your participants. Many employment social enterprises may offer several components at one time, and you may also already be providing some of these services to your current participants. In a few minutes, Casey will take us through the specific definitions of each component. However, you should keep in mind that states may apply these definitions slightly differently to each activity. That variability also speaks to how flexible this program can be for services. This is also a good opportunity for me to mention another benefit of being an E&T partner. You will have the potential to coordinate with other partners on delivering services to SNAP recipients as part of a SNAP E&T ecosystem or network. For example, if your social enterprise's mission is focused around the work experience component, there may be another E&T partner in your area that is delivering education and training related services that could supplement your program. Through E&T, your agencies could connect for the ultimate benefit of the people that you serve. Before we dive into the definitions of each component, we thought it might be helpful for me to talk about how CEO partners as an E&T service provider. The next few slides will show you how our organization has mapped our existing program model onto reimbursable SNAP E&T components. So Casey and I work for CEO, which is Center for Employment Opportunities. And CEO provides immediate, effective, and comprehensive employment services to individuals who have recently returned home from incarceration. Our organization's vision is that anybody who is justice impacted and wants to work can come to CEO for employment and training. So I want to take a moment here to just highlight why E&T is so important to returning citizens and also to our organization. We'll get into this more in the next webinar, but I wanted to set the context that E&T is a good fit for employment social enterprises because of the clients that we serve. Often, workforce programs shut out individuals who have a criminal record. Services may not be targeted to their needs, center their career goals and training, or meet them where they are during this critical time of transition. SNAP E&T is a program that can reach them when other programs don't. For starters, a critical part of reentry is food security. If you don't have enough to eat, you won't be ready to work or be able to focus on anything else. Receiving SNAP benefits helps individuals who are returning to the community gain that stability. Even if we weren't an E&T partner, CEO would be working to connect our participants to SNAP for that very reason. SNAP E&T also provides access to job training and additional funding for workforce development activities. This provides CEO with crucial support in the 30 locations in which we operate so that we can continue doing the work that we already do. And lastly, SNAP E&T provides support to SNAP recipients via additional benefits that they would not otherwise receive, via a 50% reimbursement for supportive services. We will talk more about this in detail later in this webinar. All of these factors taken together demonstrate how SNAP E&T services align well with CEO's core program model and mission. This slide will show you how CEO and how our program model maps onto different E&T service components. So our 4-part program model likely looks familiar to you as a fellow social enterprise. Our model is set up so that our participants can move through at their own pace, depending on their needs and unique circumstances. The CEO model starts with classroom training, which prepares participants for weekly job coaching and job development services in our offices. These services are aligned with the job search training component and also sometimes the education component, as you can see highlighted in the first and third columns. Some aspects of our transitional work crew operations map onto the work experience component, which you'll see in the second column. And lastly, our retention services are considered a reimbursable expense for the job retention component for up to 90 days. All of this means that many of our program expenses associated with our core program model are eligible for E&T reimbursement. Examples of eligible expenses include the cost of our program staff leading these portions of our model, office expenses, the cost of providing classroom training on certain certifications, and equipment related to our job experience. Now I'm going to hand it over to Casey again so that she can talk more about each SNAP E&T service component in detail.
Thanks, Hillary. Okay, so now that you have seen an example of how CEO thinks of the E&T in relation to our program, we're going to walk through each of the components briefly. So as Hillary said, components are the specific services offered by 50/50 partners to help SNAP E&T participants increase their employment skills and find permanent work in the community. These are the main components, but the availability of components may vary by jurisdiction that you're in. At this stage, we just want you to start becoming familiar with these terms so you can think about areas of overlap and maybe how your program might apply. As we go through the definitions, a good way that I think about it, when I think about E&T and CEO, is I try to think about what the participant experience is when they're going through. And what components they might need to be successful in finding a job and get that employment training. So I think that's good to think about that. So you're not just thinking about like, oh, a SNAP E&T participant just receives education. A likely good experience for them is that they receive several components. I just wanted to point out that you notice that we put icons next to the components, and that's hopefully a little bit of a guide for you as we're working through the definitions and also to just like keep you in it with us and know where you are in the journey. The first two components that we are going to cover likely encompass a lot of your vocational services as a social enterprise. As ESEs, we know that our clients or participants need vocational training that is tailored to meet them where they are. We do offer that work experience through our social enterprise, but they likely need that to complement that experience with some vocational training. So supervised job search as a component might include aspects of your program where you are teaching participants how to go about looking for a job. So in terms of the definition, when participating in supervised job search, E&T participants may make inquiries or turn in applications to employers over a specified period of time. It can occur in an individual or group setting. And one other thing that I wanted to flag for you is that recently FNS in Congress changed this component to be defined as job search, to be defined as supervised job search. And probably the intent behind that is that just making a computer available to a participant and saying, hey, go search around for some jobs isn't that meaningful as a vocational training exercise. So the intent here is really to engage participants with supervised job search. So one component that supervised job search is often coupled with is this job search training component. This is a service that enhances participants' readiness to search for employment by teaching job seeking techniques and increasing motivation and confidence. So this might include job placement services or related training and support activities. So for employment social enterprises, I think about job search training activities as the ones that we work with participants or clients on that are really helping them work through their barriers to employment. They might come up directly when they're being employed by us, and they might need to be addressed with some additional training. Or maybe the participant comes in the front door and says, these are a few things that I need to work on before I'm ready to go out on a job interview. So this is, you're probably thinking, yeah, like this is a broad category. It could include a lot of things. So at least that's what I hope you're thinking. So I just wanted to pause at this point and maybe get your thoughts as a group. And if you could put in the chat, maybe some activities that you all offer at your employment social enterprise that might be considered job search training and an E&T program. Just gonna click over to the chat here. Great. So mock interviews, resume writing, interview skills, resume writing. These are all great activities. How to go on a Zoom interview. It's a great one. I just saw a tweet recently from a public defender who talked about how much people don't realize how much people coming home from incarceration need help with technology. It's a really good reminder. Yep. Job readiness, conflict management. Wonderful. Yes. So all of these things that you all offer. One more from Jessica. Searching for jobs, mock interviews, cover letters, digital literacy. Yes, these are all great examples and would absolutely qualify as a job search training component activity in an E&T program. Click on the chat here. Okay, so I wanted to give you an example of how CEU's program, how we think of job search training and supervised job search. So many of the things that you all just called out, the curriculum about our pathways to employment classroom training, creating a resume, practicing an interview. I've learned from Greg and his colleagues that employment social enterprises, 80% of our clients have been justice impacted. So it's likely that you are all are also working on how to answer a conviction question with your clients and participants. So these are a few examples of slides that I pulled from our classroom training and would be considered job search training. So if it's also helpful to think about in terms of expenses or how these services components map onto eligible E&T expenses. So for example, the portion of time that our classroom instructor spends on these activities with SNAP E&T enrolled participants is a reimbursable 50-50 expense. And that's how that's allocated, both by the component and the time he spends with E&T participants. Okay, moving on. So the next component, spoiler alert, is also likely a service that is directly aligned with your E&T program, your employment social enterprise. So under E&T, the work experience component provides E&T participants with actual work experience to improve employability, build transferable skills, and move participants through regular employment. This work experience component is likely the time that participants spend employed in your social enterprise. E&T recognizes that SNAP recipients engaged with E&T likely need experience working within a job to be prepared for employment in the community. And we as employment social enterprises directly supply that experience with our direct employment of individuals in our social enterprise. One thing I wanted to flag for you all in your component just to think about is we pay our participants for work, employment social enterprises, and sometimes wages will impact an individual's eligibility for SNAP. So if you are paid to a certain amount, you might not be eligible for SNAP anymore, and then that would limit your time in the work experience component. So it's just something to start to think about, and obviously it's a little bit in the weeds, and we'll get into that more as we go through the webinar series and probably talk about it more in the cohorts. So in terms of CEOs examples of work experience in our social enterprise, I think this is probably pretty obvious to everyone on the line, but participants are employed directly by CEO 4 days a week. And there are many things about that transitional job that qualifies as work experience. The supervision that individuals get while working with CEO, transportation to and from our work sites, the equipment that CEO needs to purchase to perform that job and offer that work experience, and then even the platforms that we need to maintain to communicate about barriers to work that are coming up during that work experience. Those are all examples of things that are eligible activities associated with our work experience. Still on the work experience component for a couple more slides, but one thing we also wanted to note that is hopefully exciting to this group and will get your wheels turning is one thing that Congress recently added is that they allowed subsidized employment and apprenticeships as allowable activities associated with the work experience component, and that included transitional jobs. USDA has a pending regulation about this, and states are still learning how to implement this and talking with FNS about additional policies that they'll need to develop to implement this. But up until this point, wages in particular are not a reimbursable or eligible part of the work experience component. So this will change that. It's still to be determined, and we're still going to learn from FNS and state SNAP E&T agencies what they want to see in terms of these allowable activities. But over the next couple of years, hopefully through this community that we're building of employment social enterprises interested in E&T, we can learn this together, and we can learn about how to implement this change together and what questions might come up for employment social enterprises. The final sort of work experience type of component that we'll talk about is another type of experience-based learning on the job training. It's a term you all might be familiar with from other workforce programs and working with the Workforce Innovation Opportunity and Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And this component specifically covers job training services that are delivered in partnership with other agencies that are covered under WIOA. They may be developed and administered by state agencies, local governments, or the private sector. One thing to note is that, strictly OJT under WIOA requires that the individual receiving OJT be retained by the employer after that paid training. Usually, sometimes, OJT strictly doesn't align with our ESE models. So it's likely your social enterprise and your work experience will be under that work experience component and not OJT. But again, Hillary mentioned that how states interpret these components varies a little bit. And if your state offers OJT and not work experience, you really want to talk to them about what types of activities they're considering eligible for OJT and see if you qualify. Another thing to note is that, just as Hillary said, you can kind of coordinate with other E&T partners. As an ESE client could participate in a transitional job with us and then go to another type of E&T OJT following our program and still be a part of that E&T program. Moving on to another component that could cover many activities that ESEs offer is the education component. And this includes activities that help participants gain skills that will improve their employability. One thing to note is all educational activities must have a direct link to the job market and in order to be approved by FNS. So Hillary mentioned sometimes our classroom training and our job coaching and job development states qualify it as the education component because within those parts of our services, we do offer certifications and things like forklift training and kind of CDL training and other things like that. And they consider it more appropriate for this education component. And I didn't want to mention that, and this again gets a little bit into the weeds, but having your activities qualify as education might be good for your clients because Nick and Susan mentioned this a little bit in the first presentation, but there are individuals classified as able-bodied adults without dependents or ABODs who, when they're receiving benefits, SNAP benefits, they have to meet a work requirement of 20 hours a week or 80 hours a month. And if they're using E&T to meet that work requirement, they can only receive supervised job search or job search training for up to 10 hours or half of that time. And then they have to cover it with their hours with other activities. So from the client's perspective or participant's perspective, if they're participating in education instead of that supervised job search training, then they just don't have to have that on their minds. So that's one thing to think about, and obviously a little bit in the weeds, but at this point, just want you to think about how there might be some services that you offer that fall under the education component. Okay. So the last, so we're going to go over job retention. So job retention is a component that comes after a job placement and provides support for E&T participants who have secured permanent employment. So one thing to note is that this component must be offered for at least 30 days and up to 90 days. Participants are only eligible for the retention component if they've received another component as part of their E&T program. One thing to note is that your services, like your model, does not need to be restricted to the 30 to 90 day window in order to be an E&T partner. CEO offers retention for 365 days. And what that practically means is people who are enrolled in E&T as well, they conclude and successfully complete their E&T program at the 90-day mark, and then they continue on with us. if that makes sense. So it doesn't really look different from the participant's perspective, but they do receive that full 90 days with E&T. So examples of CEO retention services include financial and career goal coaching, working on conflicts at work, and providing support services like transportation or other things throughout that year. And it's in the first 90 days that we really concentrate on support services that E&T specifically supports, which Hillary will go over in a little bit. So our program staff, retention specialists and support service specialists are all part of our E&T budget to the extent that they spend time with E&T enrolled participants. This is also a good time to think about when you're serving E&T participants, if there are other referrals or connections that you want to make for them in this 90-day window that really sets them up for that career pathway, and you can work with your SNAP E&T agency on that. I also wanted to give you an example with this component of something that's not reimbursable that CEO does with E&T, and that's that we offer our participants rewards for hitting milestones. So they might get a laptop or a gift card or something like that for hitting 180 days or 90 days, and that is not an E&T reimbursable expense. Okay, just a couple more components. And these last two components might be less relevant for your E&T program. One is self-employment training, which is what it sounds like. These includes activities that improve a participant's ability to design and operate a small business or other self-employment venture. And the participants may receive technical assistance on topics such as developing a business plan, managing finances, creating a marketing plan, accessing grants and funding opportunities. And in our experience, only a few states offer this component. And the last component that we'll cover is what's called workfare. And in this component, participants keep their SNAP eligibility by accepting a work assignment at a private or public nonprofit agency in order to work off the value of their household's monthly SNAP allotment. So the goal of this component is to increase employment skills and encourage participants to move toward full-time regular employment while giving back to their community. Workfare is rarely offered as a component by states, and with our models, it's probably not as relevant for your ESEs. So we made it through all the definitions of the components, and thank you for sticking with me. At this point, we're gonna stop for questions now. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat and we can field them as a group. But before we get there, I just wanted to kind of think about, after hearing all of those rapid fire definitions of components, what components do you all think that you offer in your current service model without having to add any additional services? Hi, and yes, we covered self-employment training. I probably went by too fast, but that is when participants get support for technical assistance and training around opening their own venture or business. Great. So ICA group, sorry, I should figure out how to do this when you guys are typing so fast. Oh, great. So Marilyn said we offer all but self-employment training and work fairs, employment. Scroll back. Gabriel said supervised job search training, work experience, education, job retention, perfect. Job search, work experience, education, retention from ICA. Heather, supervised job search training. Okay, so great. So basically, this is exactly what we were hoping, that everybody's sort of seeing that your employment social enterprise is likely quite relevant to the goals of SNAP E&T services, and the services that you all are offering are well aligned with E&T.
Casey, you want me to start tossing some questions everybody's way?
Yes,
I'll take the easiest one. So yes, the PowerPoint will be provided and along with the recording. Everything's on the Reddit workshop link, and I'll put that in the chat after the questions. That's the kind of the home base, the portal for all of our SNAP resources, tools, recordings, webinars, etc. So bookmark that. That'll be your go-to stop for everything. So first off, does it matter to FNS if supervised job search or job search training happens virtually or in person?
Nick and Susan and Hillary jump in, but I think that we can expect, since that supervised job search change just happened, that is a part of that rule that we referenced about subsidized employment and apprenticeships, that individual states might have more guidance in their programs about what they want to see in supervised job search to make sure that it complies. So I think we're still seeing how states want us to report on that activity. But in our experience of states that have already made the switch to supervised job search, keeping case notes and kind of backing up just how we usually sit with participants in that activity and recording that as part of our case management case notes. When the state agency or FNS comes and visits us and wants to see that, they can open up and see that in each individual's record. Nick, do you want to add anything on that?
I would just say that I think what we have seen across the country in the past year is that a lot of the E&T services we're talking about have had to be delivered virtually. Otherwise, there was very little opportunity to deliver any services at all. And I think I haven't seen FNS say that's not allowable. I think instead it's been more of a, sort of a working together collaboratively technical assistance approach to make sure that it's, that these services are accessible, the quality is still there. Some of the things that are important to these different services are still available, but realizing that so much of our lives have had to go virtual in the past year. We can't avoid that.
Thank you. Is paid work experience an allowable activity?
So yes, your work experience, there's going to be expenses related to the work experience that you are providing that likely qualify as work experience. What's still to be determined is how that subsidized employment training activity will be incorporated into the program. So the key expense on CEO's end that might change with that change is wages. Well, we might be able to get 50% reimbursement for wages if we're offering that transitional jobs subsidized employment piece. But we still, we pay participants now and still have portions of our work experience that qualify for that component.
Next question. Somebody wants to just know about CEO's transportation model, like how you do that. So don't need to answer that now, but maybe we'll connect you offline of like how you do that as part of your social enterprise. I think that's the question. But then the other question related to E&T is transportation an allowable E&T cost?
Yes, in a couple of ways. Transportation during our work experience. So when we go, so usually participants come to our offices and then we have a van and we all go to the work site together. So that van is part of the equipment that we need to deliver this E&T component. So to the extent that that is allocated to SNAP E&T participants, we can get that. That's an example of something that's included in our program. There's also, Hillary's going to go over it in a minute, but there are transportation support services, which is in that first 90 days post-placement when a participant has a job and they need support for getting to work on their own. That's a support service that E&T supports for participants.
And then are any transportation costs covered? Are there any specific types of transportation costs that are allowable versus not allowable?
Nick, do you have thoughts on this? I haven't seen anything that's super specific, and this is like, when we're getting into the weeds on this, it would be when I would say like, you need to consult like our SNAP E&T agencies and make sure they think it's a approved expense.
Yeah.
But
I would say,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I would say that typically, yeah, you would want to make sure and clear the expenses that you're thinking of with your state SNAP agency. But, you know, some typical expenses that are common are, you know, transit fare to get to and from either the work site or wherever they're participating in an E&T component. And then also fuel if they have their own vehicle. Sometimes that's difficult to track for participants, but organizations have gotten fairly creative about how to do that. But those are two sort of common examples of how transportation can be a allowable expense to get reimbursed for.
Right. JP, you might have to add some clarity to your question that you put in the chat, but it says, how will the program be tracked? I'm wondering if that's like more in reference to how you track the components.
Yeah. Can I speak on it, Greg?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Okay, hi, thank you. When Casey, I believe, mentioned WIOA, so let's say in the state of California, anything WIOA related is tracked through a CalJobs system or a VOS system through the state of California. I was wondering how would that be tracked? That's what I mean. It's like the reporting, how to keep track of our activities, because that system has all the activities built into it and tracking it and, you know, all of that. So that's basically my question. Thank you.
Great, thanks for the clarification.
That's a great question. And in fact, the capacity webinar, we're going to cover a good bit of what that reporting looks like. But yes, you should expect to have to report either through a case management system or a spreadsheet exactly how each participant is going through these components.
I would just add, you know, depending on what state you're located in, state SNAP agencies are, I think right now, you know, many states are still kind of developing those systems and making them more readily available for their SNAP E&T providers. So some states have, and it varies from state to state, but yeah, there's going to be some mechanism, but it could be that you have access to a state's like SNAP case management system where you're reporting that activity into their system. But it is not as standard, I would say, as a WIOA program.
Excellent. Would an educational component for a high school diploma count because this is helpful in attaining work?
Great. And maybe can this be our last question, Greg? So
Sure,
we can hit
definitely.
more slides. Susan or Nick, do you want to take that one? I think you guys would be better.
I can try. Susan, you can. Yeah, I mean, things like GED, adult basic ed, those types of educational experiences can certainly be, you know, part of your E&T program and allowable. I think that, you know, and there's typically a case you can build that those are related to an employment goal. And where you need to be careful, and we won't get into this today, is just sort of this dividing point between K through 12 and what's sort of available as an entitlement to all young people as far as education goes. Those types of things are not going to be eligible as a reimbursed service. There may be a good thing for people to participate in, but you need to sort of look beyond those and look again at these sort of GED, high school completion, those types of things that are necessary to move people forward from a work perspective.
Great. So Erica, you're next up on the question queue. So I'll let Casey and Hillary get through the rest of the PowerPoint. And just again, we'll take questions at the end, and we'll stay around to answer as many questions as we need to make sure we get to everybody's question. So back over to you.
Great. And I just have one more slide, and then I'm going to kick it back to Hillary, and you guys will have had enough of me at that point. But so the last thing that we wanted to note is that all E&T programs require an employability assessment for each E&T participant. So the assessment seeks to evaluate the participant's employment skills and needs. And this assessment is used to place a participant in the right component that suits their skills and interests. So this is a required element of services, but it's not a component of it itself. In most cases, you're likely delivering or using an employability assessment that would fit with what your state SNAP E&T agency is looking for. That's the case with CEO, and our Job Start Ready assessment usually fits the bill, and we don't have to change anything about it. But in some places, the county or state will also have their own assessment tool that might be 1 or 2 pages that you have to use and have each participant go through with you as part of their E&T program in particular. So just wanted to note that as part of the services to think about as well. Let me kick it over to Hillary to talk about support services.
Thanks. So this is going to be the final section, and then I'm going to tie everything together and wrap it up, and we'll come back for some more questions. The final topic that I'm going to discuss today is the support services that E&T offers. So participant reimbursement for support services is unique to the 50-50 funded portion of E&T. Support services are additional benefits and supports that are provided by you through your program model, and 50-50 funds may be used for participant expenses that are reasonably necessary and directly related to program participation. So that's very specific language, but these types of benefits could include transportation, dependent care, equipment and supplies related to training, uniforms, or licensing fees. Support services can be provided to any participant who is participating in SNAP E&T. When you create your budget for your 50-50 partnerships, you will plan for these costs and have a budget specifically for support services. Note that you'll need a receipt for each individual expense and a log about which participant received these services. So there is some administrative work behind this part. The next table outlines which services may be relevant to your employment social enterprise. As you can see here, support services cover a wide range of participant costs that might help a person find and obtain employment. While these support services are flexible, there are some restrictions on what can be funded, and some support services are associated with a component. For example, clothing for work must be purchased as part of the retention component. So one support service that CEO includes in all of our budgets is transportation support for our E&T participants. This helps them get to work during their first 90 days on the job. In our experience, this can ease the transition from receiving a daily paycheck to receiving a weekly or a biweekly paycheck. The transportation assistance assures that participants will be able to make it to work in those crucial first few weeks on the job. So what does this all mean for you? At this stage, it's good to keep in mind how support services directly help your clients as they work to obtain employment. Few workforce programs offer this type of flexibility and support. A good place to start is to think about what support services you already offer that could be included in your budget before adding on new ones. This will allow you to build capacity around tracking how these services are distributed. Also, you will need to track receipts and create records of which participants are receiving certain services to ensure that these expenses are necessary and directly related to program participation for E&T participants. So, as we wrap up, we do want to offer a few final thoughts on what you should be thinking about and how your E&T services could apply to your employment social enterprise. This is the second webinar in a 6-webinar series. So over the course of the next 4 webinars, we would like to ask you to think about how your current program model fits within these component definitions. You likely don't need to redesign your program or add any services to get started. You could ask your state agency which components they currently offer in your state or county plan to get an idea of where your program or where your employment social enterprise might align. And you can also discuss current services alignment with your agency or other E&T partners that may offer similar services to get a sense of how their work falls into the components, and also assess which gaps there might be in E&T services in your area that your employment social enterprise could cover. When it comes time to act and apply for an E&T partnership, you should start your partnership with what you already do successfully. You can increase exposure of these programs and get acclimated to running an E&T program while doing what you already know that you're successful in. You can grow your E&T program by adding to your existing services and components by working on a relationship with your E&T agency and identifying how to support E&T participants in developing a more robust E&T component track. And lastly, you can ask your SNAP E&T agency to add components if they're not currently offering yours or if you think there is a misalignment. You can stick with this technical assistance webinar series to continue learning more about SNAP E&T, and you will also have the opportunity later on to apply for a cohort for technical assistance on getting started. Before we take questions, we do want to remind you that this webinar only covered one aspect of E&T 50/50 partnerships, and we're going to continue on in 2 weeks. On March 24th, we are going to talk about the client experience with E&T. So why E&T is a good fit for our clients and how to refer individuals for SNAP E&T services. During the next webinar, you'll hear directly from 2 CEO staff members who interact with E&T participants and state agencies on a daily basis and have built our E&T program successfully in Colorado. And that will be Valerie Greenhagen, our CEO Regional Director for the Mountain West, and Maurice Motley, who's our CEO Site Director in Colorado Springs. And with that, I will hand it back to either Casey or Greg, and we can start taking some more questions.
Excellent, thank you, and thanks for the great, all the great questions. It helps us to kind of gauge where everybody's at and kind of help triangulate how we can be of service to all of you. So let me go back to Erica's last question. So Erica asked, if someone enters into job retention but then loses their job, would they go back to a previous component?
That varies according to what our individual state SNAP E&T agencies allow in terms of how they structure how many times you can go through E&T. But usually, yes, usually they want us to basically start that process over again and refer that individual into E&T.
Casey, can I add one?
Yes, please.
Okay, so one of the things that's interesting about job retention is that it's the one component that somebody who's actually no longer receiving SNAP can participate in. So if you think of somebody who gets a job, makes enough money to income out of SNAP, they're still eligible for job retention, which is great. If they lose their job and they're no longer on SNAP, then some things have to be put in place to get them back on SNAP and eligible again. So that's just one thing to consider, to keep in consideration. But yeah, I think generally speaking, there's an option for that person.
And that segues into kind of the next question nicely of, if participants lose their SNAP benefits due to their paid work experience, does that make them ineligible for SNAP E&T?
Yes, unfortunately, SNAP, if you do not meet the qualifications for the benefit, you cannot participate in E&T. The exception is that Nick mentioned, and that's like, there's some good support there that hopefully you are getting a good paying job when you get that permanent placement and won't qualify for SNAP. So E&T still wants you to have that 90 days of support in your new job.
Next question, is there any way for SNAP E&T to be compatible with on-the-job training program that pays people enough to get off SNAP? I don't know if I fully get that question, but it seems like, is there, I guess, something? Chris, feel free to jump on if you're, or elaborate, or if you get that, understand what Chris is asking.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, like, so it sounds like if you offer on-the-job training where you pay somebody for 40 hours a week of work a week, unless you're paying below minimum wage, they probably don't qualify for SNAP anymore. So like, does that mean that you'd have to offer like half on-the-job training, half classroom training that you don't pay for? Kind of how do you get people to have on-the-job training but still qualify for SNAP?
Yeah, I think that's like it's a tough question, because I think that's sort of how you want to manage your program with your participants. What we do at CEO is we just have really transparent discussions with our participants about how they're going to start earning a wage, and if they, in a lot of cases, they do not get paid enough in a transitional job to get kicked off of SNAP, but their benefits might go down to like $12 a month. So we're just talking to participants about that. And sometimes participants on their own will make their own decisions around that. But we do not make any changes to our core program that would manage a participant's income for the purposes of maintaining SNAP. We very much want to give participants that choice in how they want to go about it. I don't know if that helps, but I think these are good questions, because I think particular to social enterprises, this is probably something we manage that other SNAP E&T organizations may not, that don't offer paid work experience. And in fact, FNS noted in the preamble of that new subsidized employment rule that they don't have the authority to exempt subsidized employment and apprenticeship income from SNAP benefits. So they did note that would be a challenge with these new activities and people earning wages. So, I think that's something to communicate with SNAP E&T agencies about, and really have that dialogue about how people are affected and what they need SNAP for in this transition.
Thanks.
Great, thanks. Next question, which state agency organization should we contact to better understand how our state, Arizona, administers their SNAP E&T program?
Susan and Nick, do you know Arizona specifically? I think we follow up offline with folks, so we don't know each SNAP E&T agency off the top of our heads, but
no, I mean, what I can tell you just quickly about Arizona is we have worked with Arizona in the past. They have a SNAP E&T program. They have a number of third-party partners, including some social enterprises. And so like any other state, it's finding the SNAP agency, their Department of Human Services, or whatever they call it exactly. And that is something we could probably do offline, to give that information. I would just say yes. I mean, you're in a state, and not all states are like this, but you're in a state that has third-party partnerships, and there is that opportunity. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I put my email in the chat. If you wanted to send me an email, we can follow up. A lot of the work that we'll be doing in addition to these webinars, like Hillary and Casey mentioned, is following the webinar series, there'll be a technical assistance cohort. And that's where we can really work one-on-one with you to help you get to that next stage of actually implementation, working with you, working with your state agency or local SNAP agency, helping to bridge some of that, make those connections. But in the meantime, definitely send me an email. We'll see, we'll help connect as best we can and kind of make those connections where possible. Next up, Joe. Hey, Joe. what incentivizes the participants to apply for E&T as the funds come to employment social enterprises? And could you clarify the structure for applying and compliance with SNAP E&T? Great question, Joe.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And Hillary, can you talk about like sort of participant experience? And I'll just say that quickly, that in the next webinar, we're going to talk about how to refer individuals into E&T. But basically, it's pretty easy because this is an added benefit of receiving SNAP benefits is access to these services.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. And that's what I would say is those support services are a huge draw. And this may be specific to Pennsylvania or Philly, because I'm based in Philly, it's my home city. But our participants get the transportation benefits from day one. So even when they're in the transitional work component and doing job coaching, they're still eligible for that monthly transportation subsidy. And that's $90 a month that they don't have to spend. So everybody wants to sign up because of that. But there are also other benefits, like you get to jump to the top of the line for dependent care. And that may vary state to state, but if you do some research into the supportive services, that can be the best way to present it as an opportunity for participants. And, you know, they don't really have to do a lot of paperwork other than maintaining copies of their receipts if they get any.
And then do you want to talk a little bit about maybe the process of how, if I'm a social enterprise and I'm really interested in this, like applying and compliance and all that good stuff. Again, we'll talk about this a little later on. So maybe you just a quick, quick
Yeah,
snapshot.
definitely. Yeah, I think the nice thing about it is basically there's two ways to, well, yeah, there's two basic ways to get into E&T. One is to receive, as an ESE, to receive a direct referral from a SNAP E&T agency or SNAP agency for an individual on SNAP who needs services and who is appropriate for your program. And our experience, and I think a lot of 50/50 partner experiences, the pipeline that is more often used is what's called reverse referral, which is where individuals start with us who are appropriate for our program and part of our referral system, who are on SNAP or need SNAP, and we then reverse refer that individual into E&T, which practically that looks like exchanging a roster and verifying that that individual is on SNAP. And we also do a good bit of just communicating with participants in our classroom training about what E&T is and how this program supports CEO and supports our organization, and just kind of directly kind of give participants some of the same information that we gave you all, because they definitely want to be a part of the CEO community and enjoy hearing about like how this program also supports our services. So yeah, in terms of compliance, like it's mostly the two biggest pieces that we'll talk about in the next webinar, in addition to the financial compliance aspects, are that roster exchange or verifying that individuals are receiving SNAP the month that they participate in a component, except for retention. And then the reporting that you have to do around people participating in the components, which for CEO, a lot of that reporting we do anyway. So it's more about like extracting it from our system and getting it to the agency, and less about like keeping new data that we wouldn't otherwise keep. Does that help?
And Joe, if you have any follow-up, let me know. This might be specific, but if you're familiar, rideshare programs, can that be used as addition to cover the transportation costs? So are rideshares allowable? Tessa notes that it's a big barrier for rural candidates.
I don't know about that. Susan or Nick, do you?
This one, you know, again, and I know we say this a lot, you want to talk to your local SNAP agency, but we have seen some situations in a few states that we've worked with where, you know, ride shares have been an eligible transportation cost. So yeah, I mean, but again, those are going to be local things you're going to want to check out.
And I would just say, like, some of these questions that are very specific to you all are great questions, because I think it also speaks to how flexible this program can be in meeting needs. And there are for sure compliance and for sure, rules that we need to follow. And as long as we sort of understand those rules and then ask questions, it's always good to ask the question and always good to like lift up the need of your program or your participant, because there's often a solution with E&T for supporting that need and CEO's experience.
Are there targets regarding volume of participants?
It depends on your 50-50 partnership agreement. So in those annual plans that states or counties have to submit, they have to talk about how many people they anticipate going through each component associated with the budget that they are requesting. So an agency will ask us when we're making our budget how many people are going to be participating in each component. And that may or may not be in our contract as performance targets. But even if it isn't in our contract, if basically like we say we're going to enroll 100 people into E&T this year, and the next year it comes time to like make our budget with the SNAP E&T agency, and we only served 50 people, that doesn't mean that we have to return any money or anything like that. But what it does mean is maybe the SNAP E&T agency will be like, hey, like, let's request a smaller budget this time around and see if you guys can hit that mark. Because what's in our experience, what SNAP E&T agencies don't want to do is they don't want to reserve a lot of funds in the program, even though this is an uncapped program at the federal level, that they're not going to spend. So, and they want to make sure, and they want to work with us to really bring people into the system. So it varies. Sometimes those targets are in our contract, sometimes they aren't. And then on the flip side, a situation that we not often, but we frequently run into, which is a nice problem to have, is that we serve more people than we anticipated. And we go through what our budget is that we asked for. And what a state can do is they can sometimes amend our partnership agreement and allow additional funds for us to be reimbursed to serve more people. And they may or may not have to request approval of those additional funds from FNS. It depends on how big of a scale the change it is. But all that to say is in our, like, it's not, if we are going through those targets and hitting our needs and we need more funds, but it's a good question to ask agencies if during the program year we can have additional support.
Excellent. Do you know if trauma counseling services are reimbursable?
I can start on that one.
Go ahead.
So yeah, you can join us. So typically things like behavioral health, substance use disorder type services are not part of an E&T program. Your organization may offer those things and people can participate, but it's not going to be an eligible service that you can get reimbursed for. Another thing I would say is if you have staff that have been trained in trauma-informed care and they're using trauma-informed care as part of their job coaching, their work as an employment specialist, that's great. You just probably wouldn't want to call that person a trauma-informed care specialist. Or if you did, then something like that may not be eligible. But I've known of organizations that provide that type of training to their employment staff, and it's very beneficial. Those services as a standalone service, though, probably are not going to be considered eligible.
Yeah, I would just say, like, one of the ways that it could look, as Nick was saying, if you are kind of applying those practices, into like performance skills training or life skills training, that that type of training is, really directly related to employment and often does cover those topics and kind of delves into that area. But yeah, they're not getting, it's not counseling, it's performance skills training. So.
Excellent, thank you. I think this is the question, Erica, but feel free to clarify, but does FNS approve employability assessments? Is that part of is that an activity under a component that would be allowable?
They don't, yeah, go ahead, Susan.
Oh, I was going to say, I think I read that question I think what it meant was, is there like an example of an FNS approved employability assessment?
Or yeah, or is there an example of that, Erica, if you want to clarify, otherwise we can, yes, an example, please.
An
example of approved employability assessment.
Yeah, I think we can put some examples on the resource platform for you all to see. Well, we can put, we're working on a version of our Job Start Ready assessment that is usually qualifies that we can post on the resource platform, and maybe we can post a couple from agencies that we get too.
Great. This is a good question from Jesse, and I don't know if anybody from FNS is on or Nick or anybody knows of, where can I find the local SNAP agency? That's something that I think we could definitely try to provide on the resource page, but I don't know if that exists already somewhere on an FNS website, or if there's just some searching that they have to do, just Googling and trying to find that. Is there any one-stop resource for that you guys know of?
You can go to the USDA Food Nutrition Service a Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and there'll be a link there saying, how do I apply? And then it'll ask you what state you're in, and you can take it from there. It'll walk you right through getting to your local SNAP agency.
We can we'll put that link up on our resource page too, so it's so you can just find that in the future. Right.
And many states have their own website too. Usually it's through the Human Services Agency that you can get to the SNAP agency.
Great, thanks, Bob. Let's see. Okay, I think that's everything. So unless anybody else has any questions, just a reminder, our next training will be on March 24th on serving people for SNAP E&T. The Monday before every webinar, you'll get an email with the information, the login. So just be on the lookout for that. You can also go back to the registration page if you wanted to download the calendar reminders and have that saved on your calendar. But otherwise, every Monday, the Monday before the training, you'll get an email reminding you about it. I put the link to Rediff Workshop on the chat, so feel free to go there. And we'll be sending out just a very short survey again this week, just probably 3 to 5 questions, just seeing how we did on this webinar. Again, I'll take song requests. I know that gets everybody pumped up. Other than that, I don't know, any other parting thoughts from the group? Casey, Hillary, Nick, or Susan? All right, excellent. Well, thanks again for joining us, everybody. I hope this is everyone's progressing in their knowledge and learning something new every time. And then we'll see you in 2 weeks, same spot, same bat channel. We'll see you then. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.